At one point, the Urus scholars asked, why isn't anyone stealing stuff? And the guy's just like, well, we don't have property rights. So this can't be stealing. And you're kind of like, okay, well, like...
Just define the problem.
I know. It's like, what the... And it's like, okay, what happens if someone just took, like, all the food? It's like, you want to...
Well, I actually object to Benny egoistically deciding how we're going to do this conversation, and we didn't even form a subcommittee on this. So I'm just going to talk about whatever I want, and you guys can shun me if you you guys can put me on mute if you don't like it.
We're going to lock you in a pseudo prison and come back 2 days later and you'll have shit your pants and smeared it all over the walls. Whoops. All right. On that note, let's kick this bad boy off, maybe. So, today we're doing The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin, published in 1974, old school, part of her epic Hainish cycle series, but this book is standalone, and this is the only book in the series I think we're going to read. The philosophy is kind of dripping all the way through this. You can tell the kinds of issues she in particular was thinking about, but also that culture was thinking about at that time in terms of utopia and capitalism and socialism, and like those themes are just ripe throughout the book. So before I give a little bit of background on the characters and the world, I'm actually curious, Rich, you tend to have an allergic reaction if you feel that the philosophy is too in your face in fiction novels. And so I'm curious how you felt about this. If you feel like it's sort of appropriate and in the background enough that it makes it easier to swallow, or if you feel like it's too upfront. Yeah,
good question. It's not really in the background at all. It's just front and center the whole way through. But it's very well written, and it's not like it's got good characterization and stuff. So it's not the worst example of its kind. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about the ideas. When we did Welbeck, I think I described it as like, it's so rare to hear like a non-retarded critique of capitalism. And I think this is another book, which is like a very careful, well-considered, thoughtful, fully fleshed out alternative vision of a non-capitalistic, non-statist society. So it's fascinating to read about, aside from its literary merits. It doesn't bug me. I'm kind of hyped to talk about this stuff with you guys. Anarchy, baby.
Yeah, I think one key difference here is that the philosophy at least isn't being endlessly vocalized by the characters like it was in some other books. Like it's there and it's up front, but it's up front in the narrative, just like in how the worlds are constructed. And so like that's immediate and that's in your face, but it's not as if you have characters sort of acting as, well, maybe sometimes.
I think you had that as well.
You have characters acting as like particular mouthpieces for like obvious points. I think everyone's like slightly more nuanced than that.
Yeah, there's no Ayn Rand style like 40-page monologue, moralizing speech in the middle of it. It's a little more subtle than that.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read Rand, but I mean, it pretty much is like a political pamphlet, I think, looking at her conception of a sort of socialist, ambiguous utopia, as the subtitle goes. It's funny, Rich, you're hoping we'll get you over the line. I was hoping you'd get me over the line.
Oh, we need some communal brotherhood over here.
Yeah. Need some suffering for their brotherhood.
So, context for anyone listening. Cam's been dragging his heels on this, and we're recording late because he couldn't get through the assigned reading. So I figured you might not be loving it.
Yeah, it's kind of like a political tract, and we'll get into the politics of it. I don't buy the world enough as well.
Me neither.
Yeah,
that's a good critique. Yeah,
and I know it's maybe also like it seems a little bit too sympathetic to communist anarchy, and then you read online and everyone's like, no, it's not. It's ambiguous and it's harsh on each side, and it is a bit like that. But it's like a piece of leftist canon.
But you say it's a pamphlet, but like it's not. It's not. This place is wonderful, and the fountains are full of milk and honey. It's explicitly the opposite of that. the main character, Shivek, is trying to escape from this place, which he kind of has ground him down and he thinks is holding him back. And then maybe at the end he's going to go back or something, to be determined. But like, there's a lot of detail about the grinding, almost near subsistence level lifestyle of these people, and drought and the famines and people dying and unpleasant bureaucrats. And so I don't really think that's right. I mean, we can try and figure out which side she's on. I think she probably is trying to portray this as an interesting alternative, but it's not in such a jarring way that she's just pretending that this is wonderful and all the problems are solved kind of thing. Which, if it was like that, I wouldn't have been able to get anywhere near this deep into the book.
Yeah, you're right. It's not milk and honey. I mean, that, and part of the reason why people like this, I mean, is because it's titled an ambiguous utopia, and it's showing flaws in both worlds. So, I mean, for the listeners, we've essentially got two planets. Well, one's like a moon of a planet called Anarchist, which sounds like anarchy, and Urus. And 100 to 200 years ago, some people moved to the moon, Anarchist, and set up a kind of anarchist, communist utopia with no private property.
Yeah, let's get the terms straight. It's not communist or socialist because there's no state. So it's very explicitly anti-statist. There's no government. So it's anarchist.
Yeah.
There are forms of Marxist communists of wanting no state as well. So, but the important thing is there kind of is a quasi-state, but there's no kind of official state.
We're talking about a society with no government, no police, no prisons, no forced work, no forced education, no marriage, no church, and only social norms, basically.
No private property, importantly.
Oh, no private property, right, yeah.
And no milk and honey.
No milk and honey, 2 servings of porridge per day on a good day.
Before we get into that, should we talk a little bit how it starts, or should we get straight into that?
Yeah, maybe let's just set up the story slightly. So the protagonist of the story is this physicist named Shivek, who comes from Anaris. So he was one of the anarchists, and he decides, for sort of unknown reasons, at the beginning of the book, to leave to go visit Urus, which is the home planet. And this is a very controversial thing to do from both societies' perspectives, that, they have basically cut off contact with one another except for trades that they'll make with each other, because they both need certain resources, certain things from each other, but they haven't actually sent anyone back and forth between them for, probably 100 years or something like that. And so the story basically kicks off with Shivek taking one of these transportation ships from Anaris to Urus, which I think we should, for the sake of the listeners, continually say these names and continually remind them which planet is which, because even as a reader, at the beginning, there's something cognitively difficult about tracking the terms I found, and I could never remember which planet was.
I couldn't remember which is which until I clocked that Anaris is like anarchy.
Yeah, that's great.
Good.
That's good.
Yeah, I wish I had that in the monitor.
Yeah.
This is one of those books where you start reading it, you look at the back cover, and you're like, "Oh, we're in sci-fi world now," because there's going to be like the blogs from planet blah blah blah. It's like, okay,
like his mum's called like Gulag or something, or like no, that's not that on the nose. Like Rulag. Yeah, tell me about. I don't know. I suppose
Eastern European flavored.
Yeah, you have to just do obscure alien sounding names, but I do kind of hate sci-fi names there.
And speaking of names, all the names on Anaris are auto-generated by a computer, and that's how people identify themselves. And so I guess this means that no one actually has the same name, because the computer can make sure that there are no duplicates, but it also makes for sort of these bizarre sounding names. So,
and there's no like patrilineal inheritance or anything. You just have one name. Everyone's Beyonce. Like Madonna.
Yeah. And you don't really have parents as well. Like, you're raised by the community. It's very much an experiment in similar to what were the Israeli in the kibbutz.
They're called children's homes or something like that, and this is probably a Hebrew name for it. But it reminded me of reading about that in the early, even like pre-Israel state. A lot of the Zionist founders were also socialists as well, and they set up these kibbutzim where kids was totally separated from their family and raised in a community. I mean, very much like this, like how it's set up in anarchists. And I think they set it up in the 20s and 30s, and then it kind of died down in the 60s, 70s, just as Ursula Le Guin is writing this. And the general view, and at least in the Israel real world case, is that, yeah, they moved away from a lot of people had like attachment issues and psychological issues. There's also just like cultural changes in Israel at the time of the 70s, so that might be part of it. But and immigration. I came across a writer from Israel talking about the kibbutzim, and so her quote, Batya Gur, captures this sort of sentiment of the shift away from the children's homes when she goes, quote, "I want to tuck my children at night myself, and when they have a nightmare, I want them to come to bed, not to some intercom, not to make them go out at night in the dark looking for our room, stumbling over stones, thinking that every shadow is a monster, and in the end standing in front of a closed door or being dragged back to the children's house." So like captures the kind of potential human instinct of not of preferring to be raised by your own parents and to raise your own kids rather than just sort of trading them for anyone. I mean, I suppose open question for this book around like how much that is it's kind of a nature nurture question that is posing of can you kind of stamp that out of people?
Yeah. And we should say also people don't couple for life, unlike on Urus. So it's sort of like people just choose to stay with each other for as short or long as they want to. Maybe they have kids, then the kids get sent to this, these communal children raising little settlements. Yeah, but people don't really have long-term partners or anything. So this is sort of, I mean, I guess I should have looked up, sexual liberation movements and stuff, but I'm assuming this is sort of smack dab in the middle of that, where people are like romanticizing the idea of like not, you don't need marriage, you just need to, you have all these short-term partners throughout your life, and like that will sustain you, and you get together with someone for weeks or months or years and then ditch them as soon as it's not.
And then you get reassigned to do toilet cleaning duty on the other side of the planet, and you're like, see you later, babe. Yeah. See you in a few years or never.
Yeah exactly. And then I think maybe it's just worth dwelling on how childhood actually works in the society, because it's one thing to just say it's this anarchist semi-utopia, but the actual details of how all this stuff works is sort of bizarre. And also I think this is a good critique that you guys raised earlier, that it's just sort of unbelievable in the sense that you need so much goodwill and trust and cooperation from everyone, and it just seems like you'd be constantly running into free rider problems if you actually tried this in practice.
A paradise for parasites.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so anyway, Rich, do you want to talk a bit about like how education actually works and whether you thought this is a realistic picture for kids of like having no grades or anything?
Yeah, you guys will have to refresh my memory on exactly how it is, but it's kind of like unschooling, right? Like you follow your interests in whatever directions they lead, and you try all kinds of different things, and there's no grades, there's no passing and failing, there's no university. Teachers, or like any person, because there aren't even necessarily officially teachers, will volunteer to take a class, and people will sign up for it if they're interested, and everything is determined by like free association. So this is actually one of the elements of the society that I really like, or am quite open to, because there's like something deeply rotten about our education and schooling system going all the way through. I'm talking about like university in particular, but also I'm like, now that I'm coming up on the age where I have to start making decisions on what I'm going to do with my kids' schooling, I'm becoming way more interested in unschooling and less worried about having like arbitrary standards that a kid has to meet at this point, and at this point +1, this point +2. Yeah, so this is probably the element of anarchist life that I'm most interested in and think has the most potential to actually possibly be good or beneficial. But I'm also very unsure about that. Like maybe that just works well for certain types of people. It's like a lot of the people who are unschooling advocates or who are in the sort of taking children seriously camp, the sovereign child type camp, are thoughtful, well-off people who probably have like good social circles, maybe have time enough to spend time with their kids, hire good quality nannies, have interesting dinner table conversations and all that kind of thing, which hopefully means that kids won't just like vegetate all day or, you know, never learn to read or anything like that. But yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think about that? I'm sort of at the beginning of my learning journey with this. Like I've been reading The Sovereign Child. I've been thinking about taking children seriously, reflecting on my own education and how I sort of only came to rediscover learning for its own joy quite late in life, which is pretty sad. I'd love to be able to inculcate that from like day one, if possible, and not force a kid to do something to tick a certain box or get a certain grade or for like extrinsic reasons. It's better if it comes intrinsically, I think.
Also, I think you can kind of overstate how bad it all was. Sometimes I feel like they're taking children seriously. I think back to my school. I didn't hate it that much, but you can sort of say you're brainwashed to view it as normalized, and that's why I didn't hate it. But you know, I mean, also the main function of school is like a big daycare. It would totally destabilize society in that sense. So you'd really have to think of like. There probably
but people say a big daycare in a disparaging sense, right? But it's like, no, that's super useful.
I know we need a big daycare, right?
Trust me, I love daycare.
Yeah. So like you'd probably need that to have, you know, at least double if you had a double income society. So maybe you divorce the education standards, but then like education also currently provides this great social value of sort of this kind of signaling, sorting, verifying people. You know, it's like people with good grades have shown that they are hardworking, smart, and willing to jump through hoops, maybe conformists, which businesses are interested in. So like you'd also society would need to replace that as well. But
doesn't it do a terrible job of that? Because it takes like 18 years and like vast amounts of money. We just give everyone a test at age 18 or age 20, and that would be
that would be the IQ part. That wouldn't be the hardworking part. But you could find other ways, or maybe it would be the hardworking part. It wouldn't be this sort of conformist jump through hoops. But I agree. You know, 10 to 20 years of your life is a very inefficient way.
Oh, I see. You're saying the bit that it captures is that some companies want people to be willing to sit in sort of prison camp-like environments.
Yeah, but I suppose I'm thinking of university at that point, like a sort of 3-4 year degree is a strong signal that, you know, you're willing to do what you're told and do the tests, kind of like a lot of work environments. So you kind of want that signal as well. But I think school's main function is probably daycare, plus perhaps this, you know, minimum mathematical and reading comprehension level, which, you know, we're sympathetic, so maybe we get that anyway. Maybe that's not true for everyone. So yeah, I think I have the same view as you, and for my kids, I'd think pretty seriously about at least moving to that side of the spectrum.
Yeah. So the bit that I don't love at all about this society is the crushing of the individual spirit and will, which I think is totally counter to like getting good outcomes in the world, and is one of the central big problems I have with this that permeates through this whole society. Benny, do you want to talk a bit about like that idea that they have of the sort of tall poppy syndrome type thing?
Yeah, so it just sounds like New Zealand on steroids, to be honest.
Yeah.
How are you guys describing?
We lock people in a closet if they get too uppity.
Yeah. So I mean, on one hand, you could imagine not forcing kids to study any sort of curriculum is very liberating for their sense of curiosity and their intellectual development, and then you might encourage them to go and pursue whatever they happen to be interested in and good at. But that doesn't actually seem to be what happens. So instead, it seems to be sort of just coercive in another way, where you're sort of taught not to stand out. There is this term that they introduced called egoize, which basically means to, think great things of yourself or to expect that you're better than anyone in any sort of way. And so it crushes any sort of individualism, I think, right out of you. And you can see this in the main character, Shevek, who, especially when he was growing up, sort of realized he was very smart and mathematically gifted and was sort of this brilliant physicist. He sort of realized that in his classes, he was understanding many things more quickly than his peers and even his professors and stuff. But he sort of went through this period of turmoil where he wasn't really sure if that was okay. And all he wanted to do for a while was just lock himself in a room and study and do physics. But he felt like that was inappropriate, and that because they don't really have private property, everyone sort of sleeps in dorms, and private rooms aren't always available. And, it's sort of a statement to take your own private room. And, he didn't want to do that for a long time. But clearly, with someone with his talents, it actually would have been better for society overall if he was just allowed to work on his physics and given his own space where he could work on physics. Or maybe that's just the Urasti capitalist.
Dude, imagine living in a dorm over the age of 25. Come on, that is a nightmare. Remember the bunk bed at the dock hut that we stayed at?
Yeah, exactly.
It's honestly a hellish experience.
Little kids screaming all night.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem like they're all getting laid more though, than especially kids these days. So that's one positive thing. What I
they
find
get sick of it, right?
Like,
they find it too meaningless, and they get over it by the time they're 20.
Like the main characters do, and that maybe is Le Guin speaking to how she'd feel about this sort of stuff. But it seems like a lot of people don't, and they just I guess ask each other very upfront if they'd like to copulate if you're getting along with someone.
It's not unlike my experience on the Banana Pancake Backpacker Trail, where you stay in dorms and you ask people if they'd like to copulate it. No one owns anything.
That's true. This is just the South Islands in Thailand, just on the moon, and with significantly worse weather.
Yeah.
So it's oppressive in some way. I mean, I think one of the major themes that Le Guin is getting at here is that despite everyone ostensibly being free to do whatever they want, society ends up getting governed by certain norms anyway, right? So you might not have explicit laws that dictate what people have to do, but there are these cultural norms and expectations that dictate how you should behave, how you should relate to other people, what sort of jobs you should do. And this is, I guess, Cam, why I sort of disagree with you. It seems like a major theme that she's saying you can't just easily set up these sort of utopic conditions in which you expect everyone to cooperate and stuff. Because even if you get yourself into a situation where individuals themselves are actually ready to sacrifice some of their time and stuff for the greater good, quote unquote, right? They're not actually looking to stab people in the back or make a bunch of money or whatever. They're actually willing and wanting to be part of this anarchist utopia. You're still in the situation where something is sort of governing all these social relations, and whatever that is holds a lot of power over people and ends up being just as oppressive, and I would argue more so than any sort of overt laws set up by a government or anything.
Yeah, I mean, more so is interesting. I mean, it's certainly potentially as strong. Sometimes it feels like laws could be stronger, and sometimes the cultural norms.
I think she would probably say in capitalist society, the coercion is of the form, you will do this work or you will starve to death. And here the coercion is of the form, if you don't do this work, we will gossip about you and try to convince you otherwise and shun you and so on. So I think she would argue, or an anarchist would argue, that it is a softer form of coercion. But I find it horrifying. I mean, obviously it's hard because we're so steeped in our own existence. But this is the same amount of coercion in a different form, as you say. You just have to be towing the line constantly, and everyone is constantly going to be monitoring whether you're putting in enough effort and playing your part well and so on, in a way that is horrifying in a different way. And then, of course, like the other thing is that bugs me about this is that the simplified brutish version of capitalism where you will work or you will die is also not true in modern social democracies where you have like a state that collects tax revenue and has a social safety net, things like that. You're actually not going to die if you don't do your part. So you have kind of like elements of this as well, where if you're sick or, I mean, obviously all these systems don't work that well, but they still work enough such that like people are not actually, mostly for the most part, like their lives are not in peril if they can't get a job.
Yeah.
I think the social censure required for any of this stuff to work would have to be so strong that it stretches my ability to imagine. Because you mentioned freeloading before, Benny, like in this society, if you want, you can go to the communal hall, eat your 2 meals a day. Technically, you could eat more if you wanted. No one would actually stop you.
Yeah.
You can claim this luxurious single room.
Yep.
And you can refuse all the work orders that get delivered to you. You can do all of that. You can also hoard belongings, even though there's not meant to be any ownership. There's one character who has like a bunch of stuff that he's like purloined in his room.
Yeah.
And so okay, I just want to say my big criticism of this book, because I think it goes through all of these sectors, is that like the idea here with the anarchists, I think, is that like people are not inherently bad, or like the problems of society stem from poverty, alienation, and artificial scarcity imposed by capitalism. And that if you remove those strictures, then people will behave well and they want to work and they want to contribute and so on. And I just don't think that's true. I think like the much simpler model of human behavior is people respond to incentives, and those incentives include laws and sanctions and stuff, as well as soft norms. If you removed all the actual hard laws around having to work to earn a wage and not commit crimes and so on, you need some incredible soft norms to replace them. I just don't think it could happen.
Yeah.
I think people will inevitably do the least that they can get away with without being completely shunned or getting beaten up. Because I want to talk about like violence and crime and stuff as well, but maybe we get to that later. But the single underlying thread is that like I think people some people are just bad. The sociopaths exist. They will take advantage. People will get away with whatever they can within the framework of any given society. And it's totally naive to think that one particular way of doing things will change the deep logic of human nature. Because not everyone responds that well to social norms. Like not everyone is cowed into total submission by them. And also, from a game theoretic point of view, over time, you should expect more and more people who are resistant to those social norms, right? Like, what is it, the hawks and doves thing? Like, the hawks should start to gain an advantage in a society like that.
Different metas can change, yeah. I agree. I agree fully. I think, I mean, Le Guin was reading a bunch of kind of anarchist writers, like leftist anarchist writers that influenced us. So I think Goodman, who was like a New York Jewish writer in the 60s, and then Kropotkin, the sort of Russian 1890s, very influential kind of anarchist socialist writer. And I think the Russian thinker particularly, he just thinks that, yeah, like mutual aid is in our instinct. And if you took away property rights, like there would be no reason to be violent or to steal or to be selfish or to not pull your weight, which I just don't buy. I think it's wrong, it's false. And like there's even speaking of political philosophy put into characters' mouths, like there's even a point where, Shevek goes to Urs, he meets these kind of like four scholars, dressed, I think, in like kind of university robes, which is quite a cool scene because he's kind of okay. I wanted to quickly say something positive about the book that I liked. I think Le Guin and her other works as well is often like this new world with like a big difference or a couple of differences from our current world, and like someone is like observing this and is so surprised, including the reader, but like that someone's like so surprised at like finding all these things that you take for granted aren't the case, and like this new world, it is the case. So like Left Hand of Darkness famously does this and abolishes gender. But so this one has a similar conceit, but it's like it's our world. It's like the character is gone to our world, and he comes from a place where none of this is normal, and he's kind of witnessing all this, and it's all surprising. He gets surprised at all these things. Some of them good things. Like he's surprised there's like a shower. It's like you have your own. He's like you have your own bathroom. But then he's also surprised there's like a servant who's like making his bed, and like that's not normal, and all these other things that we just take for granted. And I did like that aspect of like
you got a servant making your bed for you. Damn, that.
Yeah, I know.
Government salaries are paying all right.
I know, that's the funny thing. Yeah, it's like there's kind of like what's that, like the Baumol's cost disease, this sort of economic principle where like things like servants and like service industry stuff that aren't that productive themselves are like super expensive now. Like in the West, you can't have a servant. You go to like some poorer place in the non-West, you can get like servants and stuff. But you can't.
Yeah, Indian families have like domestic, even like live-in servants is normal.
Well, our buddy, Arjun, like that's the one thing. He's like comes from a wealthy family in India. And he's just like finds it hard to get used to in the West, like no servants. It's just kind of funny. Like as to the Le Guinian lens of just like going there and everyone's got a servant would be a surprising thing to see, which was true in the West.
I had this experience when I went to Mumbai, and there was we had a servant like attached to our apartment.
Yeah.
And she came in every day, and she like made my bed every day, and then like cooked food for us, cleaned the house and stuff. And it was really fucking weird, like coming from a egalitarian place like New Zealand to have someone who is just so sort of servile. It's like I can make my own bed. It seemed very bizarre, and I never felt entirely okay with it, even though it was very useful and I'm sure mutually beneficial. I'm sure she was happy with the arrangement, but yeah. It would be a tiny glimpse of the culture shock that Shevek gets.
But I think, funnily enough, the richer a society gets, then you can't have servants anymore because the opportunity cost to be something else is well paid. So you'd only be willing to. It's like why a hairdresser or a massage or so. So you go to Thailand, well, for other reasons, well perhaps, but you go to Thailand, you get a massage because it's cheap. You go to India or Mexico, you get a haircut because it's cheap. Anyway, so I digress. I forgot where I was. I see my point around. I liked how Shevek's kind of witnessing all this new stuff. But then to go back to Richard's point about, I'll let Benny jump in if he wants to, around how unbelievable everyone just is willing to sort of do their part.
Yeah. So while we're dealing with criticisms, that was also a major one of mine. Just not sort of dealing with the free rider problem or just skating over it. Then there was also, which is maybe excusable for a book written in 1974, I'm not sure, right? There's just a total refusal to deal with the allocation of resources, namely prices especially, right? So how is all this food being furnished? We know that in societies that try and abolish prices, that this is just disaster, because any centralized authority trying to make predictions about what people need and whatnot, it's just going to be rough. I guess maybe you get around this because people aren't getting things for themselves. They're not cooking for themselves. Everything is maybe just like done by certain halls and stuff. And so they just have the same food all the time. And so maybe that eases the pressure, but still they have to build. It's still a society. They have to build new things. Things presumably degrade, so they need to allocate resources to, to clean certain things, to build new houses. Their population is expanding or contracting and whatnot. And so we know now, from modern day econ, that this is just extremely hard to do without prices. And I think we knew that at this point, but maybe this.
Well, Hayek's place, I guess, is in the 40s, right?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Hayek already blew this thing wide open, right? So it's kind of unforgivable.
He did, but not everyone bought it, right? There were tons of intellectuals in the West who were smitten with the USSR's attempt to try and to do centralized planning. that spell broke at some point, and I just can't remember if that was after the 70s or before, right? There were a lot of like Russian apologists, or rather I should say just communist apologists in the West who thought that centralized planning could work, and Hayek was just wrong.
But funnily enough, this is not even centralized planning, right? Like a Soviet communists would probably at least get closer. But still, they don't have, the magic of the price system. So there's still that use of knowledge in society, Hayek and critique. But to have, you could think of a sci-fi utopia. You get a supercomputer that's maybe good enough. Even in our own society, AI potentially could solve that problem. But kind of with no one running the show, even though they do have this institution called the PDC, right? The production coordination. Distribution coordination, which kind of acts like a government, and it isn't really described too much in detail at first, but like it's kind of described as coordinating productive people, which is like, I don't know, is that like like everybody?
And it's assigning jobs and stuff, but I think they get around calling this government because people circulate in and out every 6 months, I believe. So they have a fixed tenure time, and people basically volunteers for these roles at six months at a time. So there's no way of people aggregating power over time, basically. And so they would object to the notion that they have politicians, or like no one's trying to run things for much of their lives or anything. So I think this is how they try and get around this notion of government. But of course, as Shivek points out, like there's still people with influence over these decisions, even if it's just some sort of soft influence, even if they're not there. So like these, the influence sort of seeps in, whether it's explicit or not. And then, but beyond just prices and allocation of resources, there's also just a huge problem with allocation of talent, right? Shivek is obviously this brilliant physicist, as we were saying, but he spends most of his time just doing menial labor because that's what he gets assigned to. And this is a huge cost for the society, where you have like talented people, presumably in all these different areas, who can't just work on that one thing as their job. Instead, they're getting, allocated.
But then sort of later on, it kind of seems like he does kind of get to be an exception almost. Like he goes to the academy and falls in love with learning and being isolated. And he feels guilty about it. He's kind of torn because he's been like, brainwashed his whole life to think, you shouldn't go and spend a bit of time in isolation. Yeah, but he really enjoys it.
Yeah. I was a bit confused about how that worked, so I guess they just recognized that he was talented and decided to send him over there or something. Yeah.
But even that was like pretty contingent, right? Like he could have just lived out his days rotating between planting trees out in the dust barrens and clogging toilets and doing engineering, and he wasn't like a shoo-in to get channeled into physics. It just, things worked out that way. And then after a certain point, they also stopped working out that way. So yeah, you have this society where you have no price signals, which is bad. I think like their counter argument to this, because I was reading up on like this particular brand of anarchism, which is called syndicalism, which is meaning like syndicates are the trade, like collectivized labor is the distinguishing feature of this type of anarchism, as opposed to like rejecting all of work altogether or wanting to totally deindustrialize or whatever.
Oh, this just clued me into the point of saying, so there's people like a lot of Deutschians are anarcho-capitalists, but these people would be anarcho-syndicalists. So this would be sort of like, I see what Cam was saying earlier now. This is sort of like the communist end of
this is like, you don't have to say communist. This is like left anarchism.
Like
this
capitalistic
is right one. Yeah.
Right.
Which the big thing for them is property rights. Yeah, property rights and like nothing else.
Right. Yeah, this is the problem with like anarchy, right? Is it includes like the David Friedmans of the world, and it includes like the full-on degrowthers of the world, and this, which is sort of somewhere in between, and various other factions. I guess we should just say that so that people know what we're talking about. But their critique is something like, so we use price signals, you think, oh, that's how you determine how to allocate resources in a society, and it's nightmarish to try and do it otherwise. And their counter-argument would be something like, no, that's how you determine demand via purchasing power, not demand via actual genuine underlying need. So it's like good at getting consumer electronics into the hands of rich people or something, but it's not good at allocating people what they need to actually survive and meet their needs. Or like, for instance, it doesn't prevent all of these social ills that we have in our societies. Like there shouldn't be homeless people and there shouldn't be starving people and so on. So they say, yeah, price signals are good they're optimizing for a certain thing, but they're not optimizing for the thing that we're interested in. So I still think that's sort of silly only because there's not a better way of doing it. But if they could come up with like Galaxy Brain AGI allocation machine, then I'd be kind of like more on board with it. But this society is not going that way. They're not like a technological anarcho-syndicalist. They're like a close to subsistence level society who aren't, as far as I can tell, are not interested in techno optimism. So there's kind of nothing to hold on to there.
I was going to bring it up. I think it's important to point out, though, that Anaris, the anarchy moon, is at subsistence level. And so in terms of allocation stuff, yeah, maybe they're not concerned around that. It's like they're barely getting enough to survive. But I think it's like this kind of barren land as well. Like there's not a lot of resources there to live on.
Except for minerals.
Yeah, except for minerals. So Urus, the rich company, comes and buy it. So one time
they sell it to the profiteers. Profiteers is like a curse word for them.
Yeah, one time they have property rights. That's when they sell to the Urus.
But they get petroleum and certain manufactured goods from Urus, sort of implying that they do need people to actually supply them with things, right? Because they're incapable of. It's not even subsistence in the sense that they're subsisting totally on their own. Like they need external goods to actually survive.
But I was thinking because I'm just thinking this as society, we're all not really buying it would work, but I kind of think of it as like small enough, like homogenous group of people that all kind of buy into this ideology. I could kind of imagine it going for a bit, but then I'm not sure if we have any protections against defectors. And as soon as you got bigger and like non-homogenous societies with like natural Schelling points in groups and out groups, like I just don't really buy it. Even without that, there's issues with how does it stop violence and how does it stop stealing? That's the thing. It's like there's just like at one point the Urus scholars ask, like they're just really interested, like why isn't anyone stealing stuff? And the guy's just like, well, we don't have property rights, so this can't be stealing. And you're kind of like, okay, well, like
just define the problem.
I know. It's like, what the fuck? And it's like, okay, what happens if someone just took like all the food? It's like, you want to fucking eat, right? Like, what if someone took all the food? Like, and then it's like, it doesn't matter if there's no fucking property rights. Like, if you can get a group together, or you're strong enough, you can get all the stuff and dominate it. And then they're just kind of like, no one would. I think the implicit point, and maybe it was even explicit, is like no one would want to do that. Like without property rights, no one wants to do that. And then it's like, well, okay, I don't really buy that, quote, capitalism is the cause of that stuff. I buy more into this sort of Hobbesian human nature of wanting to compete over resources, wanting to compete over people, and wanting to defer others if you're worried about them. Like there's kind of game theoretic reasons why violence can erupt. And like the solution is you get this Leviathan, this government that has a monopoly on violence, this kind of definition of government, to stop it. And
scarcity is the state that causes these bad outcomes, right? And so they correctly identify that, but they believe that scarcity is like an artificial constraint imposed by capitalism, and that you can do away with it through this. But I have to believe that which of these societies is going to generate more scarcity? Like, it's a no-brainer for me that the anarchists are going to have more scarcity, and therefore it beggars belief that they won't also have the associated competing for scarce resources and crime and theft and all that kind of stuff. And I just, that's where I just think none of this makes sense, because their grounding assumption is that you can get rid of scarcity. And those are like scarcity, poverty, alienation. Those are the core drivers of antisocial behavior, crime, etc. And I just don't think that's true. But even if it was true, they're not getting rid of scarcity. The way that their economics is fucked. The way that their society runs is through not having proper division of labor, not having price signals, and quashing the individual spirit that tends to lead to breakthrough growth technologies that actually improve everyone's lot in life. By having none of those three strands, they're trapped in this like little local optima or whatever, which is like, maybe it is sustainable, but it's not actually going to be a very good life.
Also, I'm not sure if the wealth like inequality between Urus and Anaris is like big enough. Like it's kind of like, I don't know, it kind of feels like USA versus like Europause or something. You know, like not even, no, it's probably more so than that. But like, I just think if you really had this for like 170 years, like it would be so vast, the difference.
The U.S. versus Malawi or something.
yeah, like
true. Yeah, that's how it's worked for us in our world, right? Like,
yeah,
capitalism has massively increased inequality, but it's dragged up the floor hugely compared to 100 years ago.
I mean, so the other thing when Shivek goes to Urus and what he notices is like this different status. Like he notices like you have these like scholars, and at first he really likes them. Like these are my people, we're into physics, but then he notices some of them kind of look down on others, and then he notices, of course, the servant, and he notices these hierarchical differences which he doesn't have at all. And I thought, okay, that is important. People care about that. We compare ourselves, to the Joneses next door. But there was one line early on, it kind of implied there was no status. Like Shivek wasn't used to this, but like I imagine there would be heaps of status games in Iris. But to be fair to Le Guin, I think she does show that is the case as well, and it filters through in academia. I did like the interactions with Sabul, is it? Like his his teacher or mentor, not much of a mentor. It's like slovenly fat guy with like robes, lives in the library that teaches. Well, he doesn't even teach him. He gets Shivek to like learn Iotic, like the language of Urus, and he go away and learn this and come back, and he comes back, and then he steals all Shivek's ideas and plays them off as his own and sends them over to Urus. These kind of breakthrough, I think, the simultaneity theory.
And not just steal Shivek's ideas. I mean, I think this is actually important because it speaks to just the lack of innovation on Anaris, which is that Sabul originally became a famous physicist on Anaris because he basically translated certain works from Eurus. There were just common works on Eurus, but they speak different languages. So, yeah, he was able to translate the Eurosity work, and then people thought these were new ideas on Anaris, and so he got credit for them. And it's only Shivek later on who realizes that these are all just originally Eurosity ideas, and Sabul actually hasn't, generated any novel ideas at all. And so there is just a total stultifying of progress and innovation on Anaris.
Should we talk about the crime and justice system, or lack thereof?
Yeah, I mean, does she address it apart from, I think there's a question of why is there no violence, and he says there kind of just isn't, but did they address it more thoroughly?
Well, assuming it's not that tautological thing where he's like, no, there's no murders because there's no law against murders. I mean, people sometimes kill each other.
You don't own your body, actually. You don't own your body. Don't egoize like that. If someone wants to kill you and take what's inside you, that's their right.
It's funny that it's quite a common thought, though. Like, you take away laws, there's no crime. Like, I've heard that been made before, and it's kind of like, we sure. And, like, there is a kernel of truth there with some crimes have this kind of, societal construct element to them. But often that's a good thing.
Well, if they're a genuinely victimless crime, right? Like,
but also, you can argue over whether a crime is good. Particular laws and particular crimes are good or bad, but
did you guys catch what they do here? Because my memory is something like, if you say sexually assaulted someone or something, it was something like, oh, you might want to check yourself voluntarily into a reform institute unless the neighbors come around and beat you up or something like that. So some kind of mob justice type thing. No policing, no courts, no prisons, but possibly some kind of retribution. There were some other instances of random violence that I remember, like, well, right at the start, the crowd that is booing Shevek as he leaves
they throw a
for
rock.
Uras, throw a rock and kills someone, and there's no repercussions for that. So I think, are you guys remembering this the same as me? There's basically nothing formal. There's just, if you do something, then someone else might come and fuck you up. And then to me, that's also like a very unstable dynamic that would definitely just spiral into like protection rackets and mafiosos and vendettas and honor culture. And like, again, there's a very good reason to have a monopoly on violence. But like, I don't want to make that criticism if I'm forgetting that, because, I mean, like, I looked up how anarcho-syndicalists aim to solve this, and they apparently have like self-organizing militia, no standing armies, but like, committees basically, and instant justice dispensed without courts or anything like that. I don't exactly know what the mechanisms of it are, but it's like very small, very local, democratic, and then like a lot of the punishments are less capital and more around like shunning and exclusion, which also is mentioned in here, right? Like if you are a chronic freeloader, you kind of get shunned, or you kind of, people don't want to associate with you.
Yeah, so I mean, let's use Tyrion as an example, which is Shivek's brother, who
they're brothers. I
writes
missed it. I thought they met buddies.
Oh, they're all brothers.
Yeah, brotherhood very closely. So Tyrion, as I think a young adult, writes a satirical play that was mocking certain anarchisty attitudes, and so people didn't like it, and it sort of shook him up a bit. And then what happened was he got posted to increasingly isolating work placements. So like, and he was, I forget, he was actually maybe naturally good at something, or thought that he was supposed to get a placement to something that he would like, but that didn't happen. And so I think there's this soft form, or maybe not so soft, just this form of punishment where like they can give you increasingly isolating work placements such that like you'll be on your own and you won't know anyone. You have to like go far outside the city and stuff. And so I think that's basically what they did to him. And they just did this year after year, such that you either have the choice then to like abandon your work assignment, but then you'll sort of be shunned, I think, by society, right? People will look down on you, and then they have a term for people. Like some people do this, and they have a term for people like this who choose to just basically travel from one town to the next because they get shunned most places they go, and they sort of just beg for food and whatnot. And so I think ultimately punishment is grounded out in norms and attitudes, right? And if you do enough that's wrong according to convention, then people will basically shun you. But there's also these like more explicit forms of punishment where they can just give you shitty work assignments and stuff and sort of make your life very, very miserable like that. Yeah.
But that was all kind of non-explicit or non-legible, right? It was almost like they were accusing him of they were kind of gaslighting him about it, or it was like conspiratorial. It wasn't explicit like, you have been a bad brother, therefore we're giving you successive toilet duties and bumfuck nowhere. It's more like, even though you're trained as a poet or a playwright, you keep getting these gigs that don't reflect your specialties, and you don't actually know why. And then wasn't there some sad ending to his story, like he possibly killed himself or placed into some kind of committed, like a involuntary commitment center?
Yeah, I think this is getting us slightly beyond maybe the first part, but eventually I think when Shevek runs into him a couple years later, he like opted to go into some form of therapy, and they just basically destroyed his personality by like therapizing his egoism, quote unquote, out of him, and just like just totally de-individualized him, as it were. And so that's it's just another reflection of, I think, the fact that Le Guin is quite aware that she's really not setting up a utopia here, right? She's like quite aware of a lot of the issues, if not all of the issues.
I feel like I might need to explain you go, Rich.
I was just going to say, like, it follows from this incredible importance of social norms, something I hadn't thought of until you mentioned it, Benny, that if you do have subversive art that tries to subvert the norms, you have to destroy the artist. Like, that's actually just what you have to do. for this type of society to flourish. So it's just another sort of corollary of how you structure the society, which to us is horrifying, but it makes sense. You have to do that. You have to destroy that guy because he's undermining the only thing that keeps your society from continuing to work.
And I mean, it's probably worth saying, I mean, that sort of thing happens in our society, probably maybe to a lesser extent, but, you know, we have norms in our society and we have ways of maintaining it and shunning people that are outside of that. Yeah.
But importantly, we also have laws and rights and ways for people to go to court over things, right? And like pursue wrongful allegation or wrongful termination by employers and things like this. So there are, you know, of course, if you become socially ostracized, that is a horrible experience, you know, whether it's personally with your friends around you or online, what have you, doxing or pylons or any of this stuff. But there is a sort of a limit to how far this can go in some ways. There are
and we have norms that hopefully run slightly in the other direction of encouraging the marketplace of ideas and trying not to cancel artists or other intellectuals who are trying to criticize some kind of power structure or satirize something. I mean, obviously, you know, we could argue about whether or not those norms are eroding lately, which is sad, but generally speaking, we try to give people freedom of speech, not just in law, but in soft norms as well.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to explain my initial reaction when I'm saying it was like a pamphlet or she's too sympathetic. I agree there's a lot in there where she's pointing out, hey, this is not milk and honey. There's you know, human nature will come in sometimes where you have Sybil, you know, stealing Chevek's work, and you have this kind of quasi-government that's kind of acting like a government and has issues as well, and everybody's poor. I even saw like a Reddit thread of someone saying like, what the hell, this is not a utopia. And everyone's like, you missed the point of the book. What I kind of meant was what we've really covered, where I think ultimately she missed some pretty important things, I think, about society and human nature and just, you know, how humans work. And that's kind of what you have to do to make this work, or to not have it absolute chaos, absolutely destitute. But what I did like about it is just, what I think there's this truth is like you have this rich, decadent society versus this kind of poor, but like spiritual, or, you know, I think there's truth to that aspect there. I mean, Chevek, when he arrives in Urus and he's going into the shopping district, I think he calls it like Nightmare Street. And one thing he's shocked by is like the artisans aren't connected to their work, like they didn't make it, right? They're just importing stuff and selling it. And you know, I think there's an aspect of truth there where you know, there's kind of a spiritual connection, or what it means to be human. I mean, funnily enough, I also think like family and things like that are also part of that, which Anarchist does away with all of that stuff. So you kind of have this soulless element there, as we talked about, where everyone's sort of just copulating and
as you were talking, this made me realize I hadn't actually quite made the connection between egoization and anarchism, in the sense that I think I could have envisioned a society that was, or Le Guin writing about a potential society that was anarchic, but still encourage people to pursue their talents and what they were good at and to become extraordinary physicists and stuff. But now I'm realizing that maybe this is a huge tension because of what you were just saying, what Rich was saying earlier. Whereas if you encourage people to go off and do their own thing, this is sort of encouraging them to subvert certain norms of society and to change society in ways, and that's incredibly dangerous. So like you don't want to encourage too much individualism, because you need people to conform to like the norms, because the norms are literally all you have. You don't have this extra backstop of actual legal means of keeping people in line. It's like the norms are all you have, so you need to keep people in line as much as possible, and that means discouraging innovation and people going off on their own to do things. So anyway, this is possibly a very simplistic point, but I just finally put those two things together in my head.
So just before we finish up, I think like it seems like all of our central arguments are this couldn't happen, this is not believable, and so it fails on that basis. So I want to look for some existence proofs of like whether or not this has actually been tried and whether it has succeeded. So the vibe I've got, the main one is Catalonia 36 to 39, which is during or just before the Spanish Civil War. And unfortunately, that all got horribly mixed up during the war, and it's not a clear cut whether or not it worked, but it certainly worked for a while. That stuff, they managed to collectivize the means of production. They managed to increase production of some things, and like a lot of the economy was running under anarchist control. And then there's a few other little scattered examples, which are all also on like quite short timescales. And the things that they have in common seem to be that they're really small to medium scale, and they are in societies where like people know each other reasonably well, and there's some kind of like, especially if there's some kind of common enemy or something like that, like during wartime.
I can imagine that's where it works.
Yeah, but it just doesn't seem to, or at least based on our few case studies we have, it doesn't seem to scale very well into like a fully industrialized society where you have external threats to your existence, or you need external trading partners, and B, where you just can't possibly know all the people in your community. You start to get some of those other problems. So like hunter-gatherers is like arguably even a case of this kind of a thing, except they don't even need the syndicates. They don't even need the democratic committees and subcommittees and stuff, because they have such a small number of resources and relationships to allocate and organize. So they can just do it they can do it much more simply than this. But they do congregate on the same thing of, is it called like a reverse dominance hierarchy or something like that? I don't know if you guys have come across this, but basically, if someone starts getting cocky and acting like an alpha male, you shun them, make fun of them, or just totally ignore them. And ultimately, anyone can just walk away from the band or the group as well. So, yeah, kind of a good organizing principle when there's not that much to organize and when everyone knows one another, and seems like it doesn't scale and would not be a good replacement for our current society is kind of where I'm at with it. I don't want to be too harshly critical because, A, we're totally indoctrinated in the system that we live in, and B, like maybe true anarcho-syndicalism has never been tried. So
yeah.
But I mean, funny enough that this, I just thought now when you're talking about it, like this could almost act like this kind of simulacra, what we're talking about, Baudrillard earlier, where like I can imagine this book gets thought like when someone thinks of what would anarchy look like, the thing like, we've got it in the Dispossessed, but it's like it's this kind of fake universe, which I think is probably wrong in a lot of aspects of human nature, but it gets thought of as an example, and then but don't, it's not a utopia. Look at Dispossessed. There are aspects, and insofar as this is good fiction, hopefully they'd be capturing that reality. And I suppose where it falls apart, I think, the aspects where it's not capturing reality.
Yeah, the argument from fictional evidence, right? It's it doesn't actually mean a damn thing. Like, I appreciate all the work she's put into it, though. It's very thoughtful, and I have enjoyed the, what would you call it, like world building or scenario building. She's thought it all through. It's just that we don't know whether or not life would actually be the way that she depicts it, and my money is on no, it wouldn't. It would be a lot worse.
Yeah. But given that your money would be that way, I think she probably hasn't thought it through enough, or that she's landed.
Also, we're operating with more information now than she had, I think.
Yeah,
we've got more info, but for me, it just hinges on like the power of soft norms, or hard norms, I suppose you'd call them. It feels hard to believe that you could get this far just with like social censure, basically. But like maybe you can, and I've just never lived in an environment like that. And you'd have to be, maybe that's possible. It sort of works for small bands of groups. We know there are some existence proofs, so it's like I'm skeptical, but might be more of a failure of imagination on my part.
Yeah. I mean, you go, Benny.
I think I want to try and defend the book on the grounds that it's a hard subject to tackle because we have very strong opinions going in about what sort of societies can actually work well, and like, you know, which ones are actually realistically going to promote progress and stuff. But, you know, if we just want an author to set up a world and then try and live within the boundaries of that world and explore the consequences of that world as much as possible, I think she's done quite a good job, better than a lot of the other authors we've discussed. Dick in particular, who sets up a crazy world and then doesn't explore it and doesn't even arguably you know, abide by his own logic, right? But insofar as she's like set up this dynamic, there's these two different worlds, sure, ignoring that, like, could one have gotten to the scale that it's at? Maybe not, but just, you know, now that we have that premise, I think she does do a pretty good job of exploring like what the consequences would be, how people's behavior is shaped by these two cultures, how these two cultures interact with one another, the key differences between these two cultures, you know, and I think she's doing this with a lot more nuance than a lot of other writers trying to write about anarchist societies would have done. In particular, I think she probably, I'm like Cam here, I've never actually read Rand, but my read on those,
I know what we got to do next.
Yeah, I mean, potentially, right? But my sense of Rand is that she's way less nuanced, right? She sets up this world, and she basically just uses it as a hammer to say, like,
100%.
You know, to just spout off her philosophy. And so, yeah, there's a role for that, but I'm just saying, I don't think she does a particularly good job of exploring the subtleties and the drawbacks and stuff of the kind of society she wants to see. And I don't actually know that much about Le Guin's ideology. I know like a couple of the other books and whatnot she's written, and you can make some guesses based on stuff like The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas and whatnot. But, you know, I purposely didn't want to read about her biography too much for this because I didn't want too much of an insight into whether this book was supposed to be a specific promotion of a certain ideology or whether just it was an exploration of certain ideas. But again, yeah, just like what I look for in fiction is like the willingness to like set up a new world, you know, whether it's science fiction or sci-fi or our world, and the differences are just like the types of characters and the psychologies you're looking at, and then to like play well within the boundaries of the world you're setting up. And I think you know, she's done that pretty well. So I think I like the book overall.
I agree. Yeah,
I think my problem is you're setting up this world, and I think you're just changing human nature to what it isn't. People wouldn't be violent, and people wouldn't want to be selfish and defect because there's no property rights and laws. So you buy that premise, but like that's a pretty big thing to buy, and I think it's not true. But you know, in that world, okay, how would it look like it? But that's why I kind of think it's like the sort of agitprop simulacra. Oh, Jesus. Yeah.
I know what you're getting at, Cam. Like the saving grace to me is that there are instances of bad behavior, lots of instances of bad behavior on anarchist, including hoarding, property rights, selfishness, violence. And so she's not trying to change she's not magically saying human nature is different. She's saying, what if incentive structure was incredibly different? And so what I don't buy is whether that incentive structure would be strong enough to produce that outcome. But I don't think she's magically waving away human nature.
I think not completely, but I think it's. I feel like there's something about the nuance. So it's like, you know, there's a nuance. Like both sides have issues, and it's kind of like, well, that doesn't mean you've captured the.
There's good people on both sides.
Yeah, correctly. Yeah, I mean, she obviously is kind of
fucking capitalist scum, profiteering pig.
I mean, she certainly does have a more malleable view of human nature than I think we probably do, right? And I think that's probably a big sticking point. But I'm ready to sort of give her the benefit of the doubt on that for the purposes of fiction. And then once you're beyond that, I sort of agree with Rich in that the threat of social ostracism is, I think, severe enough to like keep a lot of people in line, right? And I'm not prepared to say that you absolutely couldn't make some sort of shell of a society work with just that sort of social threat. Like,
yeah, like we live at the end of history. There's been all kinds of different social structures that are wildly different to our own. There still are today. hunter-gatherer life is like wildly different to, and much more similar to this than how we live. So like, don't get caught in the trap of thinking things have to be the way they are now at this moment in history, at this particular setup of society, right? Like this is her job, is to break free of those constraints.
Yeah, I mean, hunter-gatherer tribes are like kind of small families, and the family unit, we do want to do stuff for the unit, and we extend that to the tribe as well, and we use metaphors like brotherhood and stuff to do that. But like people think of their family differently to anyone else. I remember like this Rage Against the Machine interview years ago with interviewing someone, and they're saying kind of around this question, would people just help each other out, mutual aid? And the person said, well, we do in a family, like we don't need laws and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, sure, but people think of the family members
for that too.
very differently. I mean, why we think the kibbutzim style children's house wouldn't work is why I'm not, taking Richard's daughter on for a couple of years.
And we still need laws for family, for like wives that get beaten up and to protect children from getting abused. Like, doesn't even necessarily work at the family level.
Yeah. A question for you guys. So I think Le Guin herself is sympathetic to kind of these anarchist ideas, but she why she gets praised is because she's not like totally buying in, and she's trying to point out there are these trade-offs. You're a lot poorer, you lose a lot of freedoms, but maybe it's better. When we compare, maybe an Aris is better than Urus. Like, what do you think the book is saying? Do you think it's kind of leaning either way? There's trade-offs on each side, but where would you rather be if you took the veil of ignorance?
Yeah, I think we'll know by the end of the book. It would be pretty weird if she didn't lean any way at all and it was just a pure what if, and it wouldn't be satisfying from a narrative point of view. So I think she'll have to put a tilt in it, and I'm sure it will tilt towards anarchist, that he would become, I mean, to be honest, I've read ahead, so I probably shouldn't even talk about this. But
trying to pretend you don't know what's going to happen.
I mean, the signs were there.
Shocked if she didn't read a certain way.
But the rules question is interesting, because I had the same thought. I was like, from behind the veil of ignorance, which society would I want to be born into? And her thumb's on the scale here because Urus is portrayed as having a lot of problems, but I would much rather be born in a capitalist, statist, Francis Fukuyama society than I would be into an anarcho-syndicalist commune or kibbutz or whatever. That's my answer.
Yeah.
Even if I ended up one of the global poor or whatever,
not shoveling shit.
I think it's better
once a week.
Although it is, I think we don't actually quite know how Urus works. Also, we should be, maybe just for the listener, we should be careful that Urus, it's the home planet, but there are different societies on Urus. So he goes, so Shevek shows up to Alo, which is, a capitalist society. You can think of America or like any sort of Western country right now. But then there's also Thu, which is sort of another nation. And that's, I think, like an authoritarian socialist state, which is sort of somewhere between the anarchist utopia of Anaris and the sort of capitalist society of Alo.
And one of the characters is from
so
there,
much
right?
so that one of the other characters
Oilers.
from there. When Shevek's talking to him, he basically said, you guys are only semi-revolutionaries in the sense that you kind of got halfway there, like you rejected outright capitalism, but you actually haven't become anarchist yet. And so you have, you're sort of stuck in this like authoritarian socialist state. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that he's on Alo. And so there are other societies on Urus. And in fact, sort of about halfway through the book, which is where we are, there's a revolt in one of these other societies. And so we'll probably pick up next time talking about that revolt.
Yeah. Are you guys happy to wrap up? Leave it there for this week, and we'll talk more next week about his big trip to the big smoke.
Sounds good.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, we'll probably hit a few more plot beats next week. I think we were mostly focused on the set and setting this time and talking about anarchy versus capitalism, which is very fun and is obviously where the meat of the philosophy of the book actually lies. But next week, assuming we do part 2. We'll
I'm in the mines next week. So
yeah.
Dude, imagine coordinating a podcast schedules. Well, a society with no podcasters actually sounds kind of good.
But do you guys remember those like Twitter threads where someone's like, "What would be your job?" and like the future like Marxist utopia or something? So I think I'll be making lattes, and someone's like, "I'll be like a dad." I remember one guy's just like, "You'd be in the mines," like just like
mines, rice paddy.
Yeah,
cool.
Nice.
All right, do you guys want to do some listener mail? Do you have time, or should we just leave it there?
Yeah, I have time. Let's do it.
All right. So we got some very good questions from Sunny. He's asked quite a few, so we'll just maybe split it in 2 and do maybe just 1 or 2 today. His first question is, do any of you have living fiction authors or book series that you're almost guaranteed to read if and when a new book is published?
No.
That's an acceptable answer. We're an hour 40 in.
Yeah, so I have to admit I'm a big fantasy nerd. So the ones that actually come to mind for me are like fantasy authors with ongoing big series, where if a new book comes out, I'll often like reread the series. So like Brandon Sanderson has a couple live series, Stormlight Archive in particular, where, for instance, he actually just released the 5th book and I'm rereading the 4th book right now. Patrick Rothfuss has an ongoing series. Unlikely that he'll ever finish the 3rd book, but I'm on the lookout for that. Game of Thrones, George R.R. Martin, obviously.
Oh, that's the name of the Wind guy, right?
Yeah, not George R.R. Martin, but Patrick Rothfuss is Name of the Wind. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to check that out.
It's an amazing series. Although it's very frustrating because there's 2 epic books and then you're just left in the lurch with respect to the 3rd one. And it's been about 14 years, maybe 16 years. And no sign of him actually finishing it anytime soon.
How old is Uncle?
Not that old. That's what's so frustrating. You'd think he would have the energy to finish it. I think he's maybe in his 50s.
Okay. Well, at least he's not going to die and leave you hanging, probably.
Yeah, true. Robert Jordan did die, and then Brandon Sanderson had to come up and finish his series, which I was also keeping up with and read. So, yeah, I don't think there's any...
I was worried you're going to list out like 10 fantasy authors.
Yeah. I could keep going, but I would just embarrass myself too much, so I'll put a plug there.
Cam?
Well, the living caveat, I'm not sure really.
He's waiting for Dostoevsky to write.
Yeah,
Jesus, Lazarus.
About? Some posthumous release.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I was to tweak the question slightly to be, are there authors that I want to read every word of? I mean, like David Foster Wallace would be probably the closest. I mean, I haven't actually read every word of it. I haven't read Pale King, but
he'd probably be a different question.
Yeah, but I don't. I suppose I don't. I'm not even sure I read.
So the answer is no.
I'm not sure if there's a living author I've read anything.
Oh, what about David Deutsch's fantasy fiction book? I bet you if he wrote that, you guys would be lined up overnight at the bookstore.
Well, if you tweaked it as well to nonfiction, there'd be people as well. But yeah, if he
for sure,
if someone like him released a fiction book, I would read it for sure.
Oh, Ted Chiang's another one for me, actually.
Oh yeah. Nice.
Which is
that's a good answer.
But if he released another series of short stories, I'd be all over that. Yeah.
See, I wish I could answer in the affirmative there, but you guys make fun of me for not even having read all his current stories.
Bro, you don't pretend to be something other than what you are. If you're not
I like Ted Chiang,
then you're not.
we know you're lining up for smut. We know what's really going on.
The latest Dragon Porn Volume 3. Those are the other ones that Benny didn't want to say.
Yeah, exactly.
Sally Rooney and who else, Rich?
No, I haven't read Sally Rooney's. I started her last one. I have read almost all of his, but I started it and
there's not that many.
I reckon she's fallen off. No, I don't have any. I guess we mostly are reading non-contemporary stuff, and the authors that fell in that category for me are dead now, I guess.
Yeah.
Like Terry Pratchett is the answer, is my fudging answer, who I eagerly awaited every new book, although the last ones were a bit shit because he had Alzheimer's and the quality was going downhill. But he's dead now, so there's no one. Yeah, there's no one.
I mean, the other thing is we're all, and this isn't entirely true, but we're all relatively new fiction heavy readers. Like a lot of our diet has been non-fiction, so I could imagine some authors turning into this. Like I can imagine someone like Welbeck, who we haven't read much of at all, but he's recently released a book, and that's on my list, a new release that's on my list, just because of who he is.
But isn't it sort of indicative that we've read Welbeck and you haven't dived into the back catalogue and started smashing through them, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's also indicative of like how hard it is to read and how hard it is to read fiction. So that's why David Foster Wallace felt more true to me, because I keep rereading Infinite Jest.
And he does live on in your heart, in a sense. No, I do kind of think that's a sort of a fair, in the spirit of the question, like whose work are you really excited to keep grappling with?
But also Welbeck, like a new release, Welbeck, like I'm curious about it, and like I could imagine us doing, like for instance.
Yeah. What did he just release?
Rich, save me.
Annihilation?
Yeah,
I think.
That might have been his. Yeah, maybe.
That would be kind of fun. We could do a new Welbeck. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah, you're right. Annihilation.
Rich seems very excited by that prospect.
I've started it and I'm not super into it so far. I'm sure it'll be good. I do own it, so that would be personally convenient for me. Yeah, you might be right though, Cam. Like in a few years, we might find out that like, oh, I love Murakami or something, and start devouring. I mean, honestly, I had this experience with Cormac McCarthy, but again, just in time for
yeah. Well, that would be your answer as well. But he's
that's a good answer.
That would have been my answer.
That's quite a good answer. Yeah,
because I have read almost everything he's written now, but it's too late. Cool. All right. Let's do the next one next week, huh?
Robin Hanson. He's got one sci-fi book. Next one.
Russ Roberts.
Russ. Yeah, I have Russ Roberts as well. Yeah, any fiction that comes out of George Mason University Economics Department, I'm straight there.
There's got to be some. Oh shit! I thought of a bunch more answers actually. I should have thought about this in advance. Genre fiction, I'm on top of actually. Like, there's these self-published authors, Quantum, QNTM, and Exurbia. This guy who wrote There Is No Anti-Memetics Division, which is one of my favorite, like, self-published speculative sci-fi stories that recently has become published by an actual publisher. Yeah, I've read everything those guys write, and I will buy anything that they publish. I bet you there's more like that too. I just got to think more about like sci-fi and the Ted Chiangs of the world. There probably are a few, but not like literary fiction.
Sweet.
Write to us, doyouevenlit@gmail.com. Just the letter U, not the word. And come join us next week for another anarchic episode of Do You Even Lit.
Thanks. See you guys.
Bye.